as you can see on the screen, is a Dutch-English chemistry PhD with a rich career in science, technology, product and supply chain development. Graham has led activities building Unilever's cross-functional innovation and open innovation management processes, and he not only brought products to market, but orchestrated the Unilever Partner to Win program. So I am going to stop showing my camera, and over to you, Graham.
Okay, so thanks, Brian. And just to be clear, the technical issue was on my side, not on Brian's side. So that's down to me. My apologies. Hey, great to be with you all. What I want to do today is to take you through some thinking about the relationship between innovation and company and corporate processes. And whilst I've had a long career at Unilever, that was about 33 years, I've also got a lot of experience in and around that builds the picture. So what I'm going to be talking about is not only related to Unilever in any way at all, it's much more broadly based. Now, my career, as you can see on the screen here, has taken me from being, let's say, a scientist with a PhD at Imperial College in London, and then a postdoc at the Rijksuniversiteit, so the university in Groningen in the north of the Netherlands. It's taken me on a journey of, on the one hand, scientific discovery, and then I did that work deliberately in conjunction with industry, so a PhD together with Pfizer, and a postdoc interacting with the Dutch state mines company DSM in the Netherlands. Because I love to see the things that I do actually applied in the real world, that's an important driver to me. And so I've done science, technology, product design, product building, supply chain design and building, and even marketing and procurement. The red thread through all of that career to date has been innovation, and will continue to be so across different industry sectors. And just by way of an anecdote, I want to say something to you, and that is that I don't think I chose innovation, I think it chose me. And what do I mean by that? Well, when you try and innovate, when you try and create value in the marketplace, that is, of course, completely dependent upon whether or not the market absorbs what you're doing. Absorption is king. If nobody imports your product, your service into their life, then you don't actually innovate. Everything remains hypothetical. So delivering all the way through to market is actually the big challenge. And this is how my interest started to build around not only the content of innovation, but also the innovation management processes to guarantee success in the marketplace. So there's the big challenge. I'm now an executive fellow at the Erasmus University in the Rotterdam School of Management in the Netherlands, and a consultant on innovation management through my own little company called InnoSapiens. I also work with a group, and I've just come out of a meeting with them, called the Nordic Initiative. I won't go into detail about that right now. It's great to be here with you. On the next slide, Brian, if I could invite you to switch slides, then thank you for that. Then here you see then that quick depiction of the journey I've been on. I've worked in science, technology, product and supply chains, as I said, marketing, market research, finance, procurement, and even HR, and worked with all of those functions to deliver. And I'm going to come back to that keyword in a moment. You'll also notice at the top of the screen that I've put little human beings there. When I started my career, there was the beginnings of focus on personal performance, and then there was the move towards focusing on delivery through the people around you and the teams around you, escalating ultimately up to whole departments, business units and companies. So don't assume that's always been there. If you're as old as I am, then you've probably witnessed some of the big changes in helping to drive delivery. What I think is really interesting to mention immediately now is that one way or another, I was always in a function. Certainly once I was in Unilever, it was kind of necessary to be in a function, to put a label on my forehead saying, are you in R&D, are you in supply chain, or are you in marketing, where are you? Companies needed that. And I think that's really interesting when we get onto the topic of innovation and innovation management, because there's a question as to whether innovation in its own right is a function, or whether it's the outcome of functions working brilliantly together and understanding their customers and consumers and building a future together. And you could even say on some occasions that you might even experience innovation happening despite functions. And I'll repeat that, despite functions. So there's something about optimizing the way functions work together if we're going to achieve innovation in reality. So we're going to need to think about the roles of functions with respect to innovation. I've designed and worked with internal innovation-focused business processes, but also later on, as the world started to appreciate the importance of external capability for the firm, the world of open innovation, I've worked and designed business processes that bring the best from the outside into a company. And as Brian mentioned in the introduction, I was lucky enough to be a figurehead in the innovation management piece within the Unilever Partner to Win program, which saw Unilever bringing its top 150 suppliers together once every year and a half or so to align on strategy and align on how to partner to win. In other words, to deliver the strategy with a mutual win through partnering. Now, a very important and not meant to be philosophical note before I move from this slide. Much of what happened during that early part of my career happened in a world that I think assumed growth. We grew, whether we did a good job or a bad job, one way or another we grew. And of course, we all know now that growth is something that you cannot take for granted anymore, and that has very much changed the industrial climate. With COP22 going on right now, we also know that one of the reasons that growth can't continue the way it has been or needs to be redefined is that we're destroying the planet collectively. We're well over the shelf life date now of the old business model. Brian, over to you. No, one more slide, please. Next slide. Yeah, fantastic. What I want to do immediately now is bring to life a couple of examples of innovation that I've experienced that I think hit the nail on the head when it comes to the challenge that innovation raises for business processes. Here is first an example of me early in my career doing innovation in the chemicals business. Now, what I recall and retain from that experience, and the photo, by the way, is of a factory that used to be called the Unicema factory in Gouda in the Netherlands, an oleochemicals factory. What I recall very, very clearly is very, very powerful focus and clear targets. When you're doing business-to-business chemicals innovation, so you're creating new molecules with a very intentional function that your customer understands well, then you're incredibly focused. Your marketing is almost technical marketing. You've got very powerful and motivating feedback loops because the product either works or it doesn't at the right price. So you're very well able with short innovation cycles to deliver. So the case in point was taking quite literally waste oils and fats and turning them into very high added value components that we used in all kinds of high-tech industries. So that was going on there. The key message then again, short innovation cycles, very motivating and not very challenging actually for business processes, because you've got an existing business, you've got the promise of future better business with better performance of what you're selling, and it's a very easy sell inside and outside the company. On the next slide, you see, next slide please, Brian. Yeah, got it, thank you. On the next slide, you see how different that can be in, for example, the foods world. And rightly so. If we were to put a molecule into foods, a new molecule into foods and put it straight onto the market, then everyone would run screaming out of the supermarket, right? We need to be very, very sure that products are extremely safe, that they're well tested, etc. And so the road between the science and the technology through to reaching the market and reaching consumers and reaching that absorption is a much longer road. And there are there's a lot more interaction involved. And there might not even be an immediate and direct relationship, for example, between the technology you build into a product and the way in which the product will be sold to a consumer. Now, think about this again from a business process perspective. The lack of obvious alignment between key functions on what it is you're actually bringing to market is actually quite a big challenge for the business processes inside the company. So I'm going to move on for that, and we'll move on to a next slide. This slide, by the way, is again just reverting for a moment to the big contextual problems. I think it's important. I'm going to underline it one more time before we move on. This point about the context within which we run our businesses and we innovate having changed, and changed importantly, I think is very important. And I find this a very powerful way of representing this. Now, the Earth's Overshoot Day organization, as it were, that pulls together this picture of how early in the year each country on the planet has consumed their whole year's worth of resources for that year, brings it home terrifyingly, doesn't it? You can see that many of the Western countries are in the first quarter of the year and have already consumed all of the available resources. So whilst in the past we assumed growth, and that helped us, it made probably the business processes easier, slowly but surely we've realized that that growth actually was accompanied by an ever-shrinking planet, and that fundamentally challenges what it is we've been doing, and will challenge the business processes too. I would even go beyond that. So one of the other great constants in our life, one of the paradigms that we've always thought we understood well, is money. And today, you know, when I work with all kinds of financial organizations, it's clear that money in its own right is also being reinvented. So just imagine that. The planet that we live in and are innovating for and growing in is fundamentally changing in many regards, but even a notion as important as money, which is the trust mechanism that allows our trading, is under challenge. I'm not going to say threat, but is certainly under challenge to redesign and reinvent itself. Next slide, please, Brian. So, you know, let's go back to this key point. What are the core processes in a business, and how do they relate to innovation? What is the role even of innovation? And on the next slide, what I've done is chosen to depict this using the business model canvas of Alex Osterwalder. You will, I'm sure, have seen this before, but I'm choosing this for a very deliberate reason. If you've seen through the lens of a business model canvas, it's not hard to see how a company would form around its first value proposition. Indeed, these kind of canvases are used very often to help startups to define their initial business model, to define what their value proposition is towards their customer, but also to define which activities and partnerships they need to have on the left side of the screen, and which customer and consumer relationships and channel relationships they need to build on the right side of the screen, so that there will be a value proposition delivered at cost and a revenue achieved through delivery, coming together, of course, in either a valid or an invalid business model. So this, I think, is a very good way of representing the early phase of a company. Now, as a company increases in complexity, as it ages, as its portfolio broadens, then you can imagine that there's no longer perhaps one business model that is covers all of the company's activities. Nevertheless, many CEOs will tell you that the hardest thing they could possibly ask to do is to change their firm's business model. So changing your business model is a massive challenge, but as we're going to come to later, may be something that is necessary in organizations going forward. I would even challenge you, as you listen to this conversation, how easily would you find it to write down what your value proposition is, and actually to complete this form for your own organization? The bigger the company, the harder it gets, and it may be that you need to fill out 20 of these to cover the key activities of the company. But I think you'll agree with me that there's quite a big distance between an early company and the clarity and crispness of the business model it's trying to achieve, and what big companies look like that have become functionalized, that have become much broader and are operating a broad portfolio. Now, on the next slide, what we can see is that what the business model canvas tries to depict is actually ultimately the viability of a business proposition. So top left, all of the factors underneath there are all about your feasibility, the deliverable of the product or service you're trying to bring to the market. To the right at the top, the desirability, who wants this and how is it desired by the channels and the customers and the consumers. And then it all comes together, or doesn't, in a viable or otherwise business. So I think this is a nice way of depicting the way a business is actually designed. On the next slide, you see something that looks extremely similar, but if you might need to mirror image your brain just for 2 seconds. This is actually the way I, in academic circles, but also in industrial circles, try to simplify the notion of innovation. I talk about it in terms of 3 dimensions. Needs, opportunities, and market access, top left. That actually on the previous slide would have been desirability on the right, but don't worry about that. But needs, opportunities, and market access. And then to the top right, the capabilities and resources that you have access to that you'll need to use to deliver the proposition to market. And then finally, I talk about methods. Now, if you're operating within the boundaries of your own firm, then believe it or not, you also have methods. You have your internal company processes that we've been relating to a moment ago, even some of your HR processes, even your employment contract allows you to talk to your colleagues about things that are secret to your own firm, but not to talk to them to other people, not to discuss them with other people outside the firm. So these three things, I think, critically come together, and I'm going to come back to that in a moment when we talk about innovation. Now, on the next slide, what I want to do is just talk for a moment, and I'm going to use here some work that I found from Arthur D. Little, just to briefly illustrate this. Imagine that you're now in a company and you're thinking about innovation and how to approach it. Well, here is one of the many, many references that you could find online that would tell you where innovation is going and would describe, based on trends and expectations, what we think the market is going to require from us. So top left, customer-based innovation. That won't be a surprise to anybody. Customer centricity, right, is a big theme. Top right, proactive business model innovation. That's an interesting one we come back to in a minute. Frugal innovation. I'm sure we're all involved in it every day, particularly under the market circumstances we currently face. High-speed, low-risk innovation is probably what's happening in the world of startups, and we'll come back to that too. And then a more integrated approach, bringing it all together. Now, I would raise a question to you all, and that is, when we think about customer-based innovation and consumer centricity, what would you do if your customer doesn't want what you do in the way you do it? So are we consumer and customer centric to the extent that we are prepared to truly adjust and adapt and change if that's what the market says? Or do we just keep trying to sell what we've got in a slightly different way? In other words, are we consumer centric in the true sense of the word, or are we just using it as an influencer on what we do, but not the dominant one? I think that's very important to think about. I would encourage you not to call yourself truly consumer or customer centric if you're not going the whole mile. Next up, proactive business model innovation. Well, what if you can't handle new business models? No, we're still on the same slide, Brian. No need to change slides. You changed slides by accident, I think. If you could go back up one. Thanks. Yeah. So what if you can't handle new business models in the firm? Do different and discrete business models even work well within the firm? That's actually quite an interesting challenge. So I think that's something that we'll come to in a few moments in more detail, but that's one to bear in mind. It may be that in order to embrace a different business model, you almost have to set up a separate unit within the firm that can handle that. Otherwise, you're going to run into all kinds of problems. Now, frugality might seem a bit easy and seem very similar because we've been through a relatively long period in many industries of very high margin pressure and increased material costs, etc., and now is no exception to that, the current time period. But I would challenge us anyway as to whether we truly understand the difference between the elements that are in our products and services that add customer value versus the elements that are just legacy and actually represent dead cost. In other words, there's cost in systems that isn't adding the value that we need it to. High speed and low risk, as I said before, it's very much the world of startups. How are you designed to map up? How do your internal company processes allow you to map up against startups and nourish them without killing them? So are you able to embrace their capabilities and bring that into your internal processes with success? Good. So moving on to the next slide. Now I think it'd be good to move to the next slide, Brian. I want to raise the topic of ambidexterity. So Tushman, and I very strongly recommend reading his work if you haven't seen it. Tushman described a long time ago now the notion of ambidextrous organizations, and I think increasingly these are now a minimum entry requirement for companies. If we're going to be able to develop able to run innovative businesses next to fully established businesses. And here you see them being described as the exploitative business versus the exploratory business. Then you can see that we need very different approaches. And I think you can then also imagine that the management team running a portfolio of activities is going to need to look at the different types of activity through very different lenses and apply very different key performance indicators to the activities that are going on, because otherwise every exploratory initiative is going to be killed in its early days. It's going to be deprioritized because it isn't meeting up to the performance expectations that the exploitative businesses have. And I think when we look at these two, we might also immediately want to bring to mind things like sustainability. How likely is it that a fairly radical change in what you're doing towards a much more sustainable solution in its early days will be able to meet the cost and profit targets of the well-established, less sustainable business? I think the chance is actually very low. For one reason, the new business is new. It probably starts small and isn't able to benefit from the great economies of scale that we've achieved in our exploitative business throughout the last 50 to 100 years. So you can imagine that in almost every sector, whether we're talking about the packaging industry, the chemicals industry, the food ingredients industry, engineering world, there's lots of different worlds we can think of. But there's a key issue here that unless we find a mechanism that allows the exploratory business to persist, despite it not delivering on exploitative metrics, then we're going to kill our own future. And I think we're all very conscious that we can't afford to do that anymore. We can skip the next slide because I've said the words. So then we move on to that slide. Thank you, Brian. Thank you for being so accurate in doing this. What I briefly want to touch on for a second is something that you will probably all know. In the world of innovation management, attempts to bring that to organizations as a business process started towards the end of the previous century, and Cooper was the first scholar to write down methodologies in that space. And this is very old work, but still very important work. And he described the stage and gate models. And in a nutshell, it's not that complicated. It's just simply saying that as we go from an initial idea all the way through to a marketplace launch, there are various stages that we need to go through. And what we need to do is make sure that we are screening activities as they go through, and having senior leaders in the company in a cross-functional way, screening the projects and thereby choosing which products most deserve the company resources. On the next slide, and there's a lot of words on this slide, but I just focus on the ones that I'm going to say to you right now. Each company will set its own filters. These are the kind of filters that you might use at each gate. Typical filters are listed here on the slide. So strategic fit, competitive advantage, market attractiveness, core competence leverage, that's an interesting one, technical feasibility, and financial reward and risk. And again, I put it to you, that it's a very big challenge for an organization to use filters like this with projects and products and services that are non-standard to the company. So how would you, at your key decision points, assess an activity that's going on to build a different business model, an activity that's going on to build a product or product type that is very different to the ones that you're currently used to? It's actually extremely hard for those projects to survive. For example, on factor 4, leveraging core competence. If you're doing something that has not historically been your core competence, then it could be very easy for you to say, no, this doesn't leverage our core competence, so we're not going to do it. But of course, with that attitude, to use an anecdote, the cable company would never go wireless, right? If the cable company had its core competence in cables, then it would never go wireless and it would never drive wireless, because that doesn't leverage core competencies. And as a consequence, it might be disrupted by a player later who comes along and does that. And in fact, on the next slide, Brian, I come to that in some detail. So the next slide is actually a depiction of Clay Christensen's model for disruptive innovation. It feels extremely comfortable for firms to just keep on improving each day a little bit more on very well-known dimensions of product or service performance. You know, we do things the way we've done it. Again, to use a trivial metaphor, you know, we have a 5 megapixel camera, so we go to a 10, and we go from a 10 to a 20, and a 20 to a 40. And we continue down that known vector of change, and we feel comfortable with it. We think we're doing a good job. What tends to happen with disruptive innovations is that incumbent players miss the point. They miss the point that at some point they're now over-delivering on a dimension that has already reached sufficient performance for a customer or a consumer to mean it's not the thing that makes the difference going forwards. And it's very often non-incumbents that then come into the market, and they're able to deliver well enough on that dimension that is the focus of the incumbent, but to deliver better than them on entirely different dimensions. And I'll give you one example that brings it to life, I think, quite powerfully. I wonder if any of you have ever heard of the Dollar Shave Club. Now, the Dollar Shave Club was a startup that essentially took the shaving paradigm, so male shaving, and it delivered a shaver and new razor blades to you in a subscription model. So essentially what you do is you take a subscription to their razors, and razor blades are delivered to you via a subscription model in a box. Now, it isn't rocket science, let's be honest. It's absolutely not rocket science. There's not a lot of R&D involved. In fact, there's none involved to make that happen. What it fundamentally represents is a new level of consumer centricity, an understanding that if you have a subscription model, then consumers will take a new blade at a frequency that you mutually agree, and that might be higher than the frequency that they would do if they had to go to a shop, of course. Now, there's a classic example where all of the big players were in the market selling their razor blades through their established business model, which means they manufacture the blade, they market the blade, they do the TV advertising, and they go through the supermarket channels through to the consumer. And they, as it were caught out by a non-incumbent coming in and getting a razor to a consumer through a different channel route with a different business model. I think it's really, really interesting. It is not a lack of intellect at the incumbents that allowed them to be disruptive. It is that it is extremely difficult to change the business model within an existing organization. Okay, on the next slide, let's keep going. What we can see here, and the next few slides will actually bring this slide. You can leave this one up, indeed, you can, that's fine, Brian. The stage gate model, of course, at some point was challenged, and it was challenged for lots of different reasons. Many people said it seems to be a bit linear, a bit stale, a bit old-fashioned, and as startups started to be the place where innovation seemed to be happening quickly and relatively easily, and as corporates became almost jealous of the agility of startups, then they started to ask themselves the question, and again, Cooper contributed to this as well, you know, is it possible to integrate the lean startup type approaches of Eric Ries with StageGate? And of course, the answer to that is kind of yes and no. It's all about company culture and what you can handle. But the notion that you can reach out during your innovation activities, as you go from an idea through to a big marketplace launch, the notion that you can reach out at certain moments to get immediate marketplace feedback, not by doing classical market research, but by actually taking a minimal viable product to market briefly to get learning and come back, learn from that, build, test, learn, repeat, and go around in cycles. Of course, there's no reason why big companies can't do that, just like small companies do. There are, of course, nervousness. There is nervousness in big companies. There is internal culture. You know, would you want to expose a big brand to the risk of a very early launch of an immature product under that brand, which might result in criticism or a depreciation of the brand's value. Possibly you wouldn't, and yet you would feel comfortable with a much longer and more linear process that did lots of non-in-market testing prior to an actual in-market launch. So there's a really interesting trade-off here between, on the one hand, wanting to get out there and learn in the marketplace, but on the other hand, not wanting to risk damage to your major corporate assets. Okay, let's keep moving. On the next slide, what I just want to not talk about stage gate models for an hour, because we don't have an hour and that was not the purpose of this conversation, but I do want to just briefly touch on a couple of points. As you operate a stage gate, and I've depicted it very simply on this slide, first of all, I want to make a very big point from experience. Formal processes don't replace informal ones, and don't think they do, please. I think it's really, the informal processes, the invisible gate in this model before the real gate, the informal conversations that create energy, excitement, and alignment inside companies are very valid and very important. All of these processes are attempts to learn before you scale, and in particular lean startup is, but actually all of them are all about trying to learn as much as you can prior to either launching in market, getting initial indications that you're onto a winner and then scaling, or determining that you're not where you need to be and you need to rethink. And a key driver for all of that is that ultimately when you scale, absorption is king. Unless the market is absorbing and grasping what you're putting out there, then of course you're dead in the water. And one other point, value is not only money. This is a difficult topic and I won't labor the point at this point, but I think it is very important for us to think about other dimensions of value than money, because if not, we get caught in the trap of never being able to bring progressive things to market. Now, next slide, the capabilities of the firm, your firm, any firm, are, as it were, finite. You have walls invisibly around your firm, both in terms of the markets that you deliver to, your brands, their reach, your channels, the capabilities, the technologies, the products, the supply chains, the manufacturing capabilities, etc. They're all kind of limited. And yet the world doesn't operate like that anymore. Prahalad, the scholar, described RSG, talking about the resources that are available to you are actually all the resources in the world, but you just got to figure out how and when to get access to them. And on the next slide, I would put it to you that the world of a more open innovation is all about expanding all three of these circles. I work with Henry Chesbrough, if you like, the father of open innovation for the world around us, the man who coined it. I work with him every week. And this expansion of the scope of access that a firm has to relevant capability and methods beyond the firm's boundaries, I think, is what open innovation ultimately is all about. And on the next slide, you see that then integrated into the stage gate. So what we're really saying is that those walls of the stage gate are permeable and things can come in and out. We're expanding the firm's capability pool. In other words, it's access to things that it can bring in to integrate with its products and services to create more value. But we're also expanding the deployment reach, because possibly things inside the firm can be created that suits somebody else's business model better. This again requires that agility of thinking around business models, and is quite hard to do for most companies. Still, absorption remains king. Defining value propositions that truly make your customer a hero and make them import what you do into their life is the crux of all of this. If you don't have that, then you're onto a loser. So let's keep moving. A few more slides to go and then we're done, and then we can pull it all together. This slide very quickly, just to show you that stage gate model has also in academic circles being fully opened up to include the notion of bringing in external capability and pushing capability out, so open innovation. So know that that's a fully integrated paradigm, and there's a lot going on in that world right now to develop that even further. Next week, there's a World Open Innovation Conference actually in Eindhoven as well on the topic. The next slide, something I just have to say, because if I don't say it, then I'll never forgive myself. A whole lifetimes of work can go into what seems to be a small scientific discovery. I think right now, as a society, we're behaving as if when we need something, there will be an immediate solution. Now, maybe on COVID, we got lucky with vaccines, but in many other areas, that's just simply not true. Don't forget that, please. I think it's really important. The reason it's important is it means that we need to plan forward. We cannot operate only on short-term agendas in our innovation processes. We need to be thinking about what we're going to need in 5, 10, 15, 20 years' time to give science and technology the opportunity to contribute to roadmaps towards delivering. The next 2 slides I want to give you 2 examples from the real world of open innovation, but broad, more importantly than that, broad-minded innovation that I think starts to become the kind of stuff that's very relevant for the emerging world. Here, what you see, and by chance it is Unilever. The slide after isn't, but this one is Unilever. You know, Unilever has said, hey, what if packaging is a bad idea? What if in the consumer packed goods world, packaging is a bad idea? And they've moved to non-disposable, non-single-use packaging in the form of aluminium bottles. So now what happens is a consumer has an aluminium container that can be used again and again and again, and they bring that to a refilling station in a supermarket that is now capable of refilling your product. Now they're doing this together in cooperation with Asda and Co-op in the UK. Now, again, it's game-changing, it's new business models, and just watch this space, because of course what this starts to open up is not only opportunities to do better on sustainability, but it offers opportunities in personalization, I'm sure, going forwards, and customization, and there's going to be a lot developing around this space. On the next slide, you see that this is not limited only to the non-food space. So in the food markets now, on the next slide, please, Brian. Thank you. So you can see Albert Heijn in the Netherlands as a supermarket introducing the dispensing of dry food components by consumers themselves into their own containers. So this is now also happening in foods. Now, think about the extent of change of the market here. Think about the new relationship that food ingredient suppliers might start to develop with retailers. Think about what this does and means for the packaging industry. Think about what this does and means for the big brands in the consumer goods industry and how their relationship with the consumer might change through this. These are massive changes that on the one hand are motivated in part by eliminating packaging, but on the other are motivated by pushing the button on key trends of personalization and customization, bringing a much higher value to consumers. Now again, the challenge here is that these are new business models. These are entirely new ways of thinking. It's even thinkable that certain players are knocked right out of the value chain because the value chain reconfigures itself. So innovation is not just about doing your thing the way you've always done it, but a bit better. It could be about doing something entirely different in a new way. I want to raise that point very powerfully right now. Now, Brian, I'm very conscious of time. What I would like to do is just round off with just really one message, and that is 2 slides on. So slide 27. You go 2 slides, and we'll use this as the last slide. That's the one. Perfect. Now, this slide is obvious, but it's nevertheless, I think, extremely powerful. You are limited in your capability inside the firm. That's inevitable. It's a fact of life. To deliver into new markets in new ways with capabilities you don't have in-house, business models you're not used to, value chains, routes to consumers, customers, etc., that you're not used to in your company, you might need to reach out and work with others. So you partner to get access to things that you don't have or somebody else does have. And that could be customer groups or consumer groups, routes to market. It could be products, technologies, and systems. It could be people and money. It can be manufacturing capability. And there's a long list here of reasons why you might want to reach out. And I only want to leave you then with one message in this space, and that is slide 34. So if you go down to some weighing scales, then I'll say the words. Yeah, that's the one. Thank you. Gene Slavinsky did fantastic work around the turn of the century and ever since in the space of building alliances for innovation. And I must say, based on pure personal experience, I very much support that work. In all of those external relationships that you are going to need to build to be able to have the diversity of capability you'll need for the future, you're going to need to strike deals with the outside world. And I'm only going to say one thing on this topic. I could talk about this for a week, but I won't. You know when a deal that you've done is fair. Your gut tells you, you feel it. So when you read the document, when you read the configuration you built with a partner, you know whether it's fair or whether it's one-sided in your favor. If it's one-sided in somebody else's favor, you probably won't sign. If it's one-sided in your own favor, you might be inclined to sign. I would really want to strongly warn you against that. That isn't smart negotiation. That is actually short-term thinking. In the end, for innovation alliances to be successful, the relationship between organizations needs to be good enough to take a bump in the road. Innovation isn't simple and isn't particularly predictable. So we need to be building balanced relationships that are motivating for everybody if we're going to be able to reach out and embrace the capability in the outside world. Okay, so by way of a few summarizing words, and then I'll stop. I think we have some fantastic innovation challenges ahead of us. I think that the size of the societal challenges we face, particularly around topics like sustainability and continuity of business, are massive. And I don't believe that companies are going to be able to solve those challenges on their own. It's going to require new thinking, new business model thinking, etc. And I do believe that collaboration and balanced collaboration is going to be critical for that. I'd like to thank you for your attention to this point and hand back to you, Brian.
Graham, thank you so much. You're quite right. This is a topic that we can talk about for a long time. And I can tell you that when we do live events, as well as obviously virtual events, that this is a topic which is touched upon quite significantly. And a lot of our keynotes do presentations around innovation and everything that goes around it, because it's so important to the ongoing sustainability lifeblood of every business we have now. And it's interesting when you hear leaders from organizations like Cisco say that they had an innovation problem, and you're thinking, wow, Cisco had an innovation problem. And it was a very simple problem, that not enough people were being allowed to come up with ideas. And that's an odd concept for a lot of people, but they suddenly found that there was a self-censorship going on within their organization, which meant that perfectly reasonable, profitable ideas were not being listened to because they came from people who were just not deemed to be worthy of putting those things forward. And they actually took ownership of that, acknowledged it, set up a process where everybody has the same presence, right, ownership within the business, and their innovation has gone forward leaps and bounds, purely through acknowledging what was a challenge for them, owning it, and putting steps in place. So, Graham, I really appreciate what you've done today. Unfortunately, we don't have time for questions right now because we've overrun a little bit. But what I would say to everybody is, I'm sure Graham would love to hear from you on social media. Please reach out and contact.
Do connect. Let's get connected.
Please do. And Graham, an absolute pleasure. And thank you so much for joining us. Really enjoyed it and look forward to catching up with you as we move forward.
Fantastic. Thank you, Brian. Have a great day, everybody. And thanks for your attention. Thanks, Dan. Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
So, ladies and gentlemen, that completes this part of the session. And unfortunately, I've just been informed that the final speaker cannot now attend. He's had an issue which unfortunately has dragged him off to another area. So that was the final session of the day. But I hope, like me, you found Bernd, Oliver's and Graham's presentations powerful, engaging, and offered you at least one thing that you can take away from today that you can start to use within your own organizations. The on-demand version of this event will be made available to you all shortly once it's been edited and move forward. And I urge all of you to please reach out to any or all of the speakers that you think you'd like to continue the conversation with. Also, for those of you who are familiar with Proqis, please do go and visit our BTOES Insights website to get a feel for our upcoming event series and the other content-driven blogs, articles, opinion pieces, surveys, which we are continually putting out there. Anybody that would like to submit anything for review in the view that we should put stuff out there, please do not hesitate to do so. There is a submission access point on that website. Once again, thank you so much for joining us today. I hope that you have a fantastic week and rest of the year, and we look forward to welcoming you within the context of both the virtual events and the other content that we're creating out there. Take care. Bye-bye.